Hello, my name is Mrs. Taylor. I'm an English teacher at Holmes Park School, and in putting together this project of protest writing for National Writing Day, I thought I would go outside my usual subject and choose an example of protest writing from the Bible. I grew up in a Christian family and have continued to go to church, but something was brought to my attention while I was thinking about this, of a text that I had never considered to be a protest at all, and is actually considered revolutionary and has been banned in certain countries. And so what I'm going to read to you are the words that were spoken by Mary, mother of Jesus, before she gave birth. She's often known as the Virgin Mary. And these words, they come from the New Testament. They come from the book of Luke, chapter 1. And the angel comes to Mary, and the angel informs Mary, this teenage girl who's a virgin, that she is going to give birth to a son, and this son is going to be the Messiah. Now, the Messiah was the one that the Jews were expecting to save them from the invasion of the Romans, to save them from persecution, to save them from hardship and suffering, and to restore them really to a place and a condition of peace and kind of close relationship with God, I suppose. Put things right in the world. That's what they expected from the Messiah. And so the angel tells Mary that she is going to give birth to a Messiah. And Mary's response is pretty much, okay, as the Lord wills it. I'll read it, read what she actually says. So the angel comes to Mary, and Mary said, this is from verse 38, "Behold, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word." And the angel departed from her. And so Mary's response is short, it's very little, and she's presented as being very accepting. And that kind of message is going to be a great surprise in any time period to any teenage girl. And in the time that Mary was living, she would have been cast out from her community. Her reputation would have been ruined, her life potentially completely ruined, to be an unwed mother. And yet she seems to accept it. She's presented as accepting it very calmly and readily. And then what happens is Mary goes to see her cousin Elizabeth, who is also pregnant. Her cousin Elizabeth is much older and surprisingly has a baby in old age. And that baby becomes the man who's known as John the Baptist. And in seeing her cousin Mary, Elizabeth greets her very positively and tells her that she is blessed, recognizing that she's going to give birth to the Messiah. And in being called blessed, Mary speaks these words. And these are the words that I hadn't realized were so revolutionary and had caused really such uproar and such worry in some countries, that they would go as far as banning these words. And this passage of text, it's known as a poem of praise to God, and it's called the Magnificat. And it's called the Magnificat because in her first line, Mary uses the word magnifies. Magnificat is a Latin word. And Mary said, so remember this is in response to Elizabeth, "My soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour. For he has looked on the humble estate of his servant. For behold, from now on all generations will call me blessed. For he who is mighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. And his mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He has shown strength with his arm. He has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. He has brought down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of humble estate. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty. He has helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy, as he spoke to our fathers, to Abraham, and to his offspring forever." And what's so revolutionary about this is the understanding, and really it's almost like a defiance in a land that's been invaded, in a land that's been invaded by the Romans, and there's oppression by the Romans upon the Jewish people, that in this land there's this defiance and an understanding that God will save the humble, those that don't have very much, those that are not trying to put themselves forward or raise their status higher, those who are not greedy. There's an understanding here that God sees those people, and that those are the people who he will raise. That there's an understanding here that God has scattered the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. So those who do think too much of themselves, those who are oppressive, those who will put themselves first and take, really. And Mary was living in a time where, so I was just reading, only 2 to 3% of the population were rich, and everybody else was living on an existence of subsistence level. So they were just able to look after themselves, really. There wasn't extra money going around at all. So in these times of hardship and understanding the difficulties that Mary would face as an unmarried woman, she is betrothed. That means there is an arrangement that she will marry someone. There is the defiance that God has. He's seen those in hardship. He's seen those who are oppressed, and those are the ones that he cares for, and those are the ones that he will lift up and he will raise and support and care for. And Mary also says he has brought down the mighty from their thrones. So in this case, this is the Romans, and it's Herod who was made king by the Romans. He's brought down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of humble estate. And I think there's also the idea that if God can do that for a teenage girl like her, who's not from an important family and has so little, then he is a great and powerful and merciful God. Now, the power of this Magnificat is that it was banned in 3 countries in the past 100 years or so. So I'm just checking my notes. It was banned in India during British rule. They weren't allowed to sing or to recite this in church in India, because of course the British, they were the oppressors of the time in India, and so it was banned. It was too revolutionary. This was also banned in Guatemala in the 1980s. Because it was considered to be too dangerous and revolutionary. And then I learned something really interesting in researching this. In the 1970s, from 1976 to 1983, there was what was called the Dirty War in Argentina. And Argentina was led by this military dictatorship. And those that were considered dissidents, those that were considered against their rule, against their policies, they would be kidnapped. And so children were kidnapped. Women were allowed to give birth. They were allowed to live until the time of birth, and then soon after the babies were born, these women would be murdered, and babies would be stripped of their identity. 300 or 30,000? 30,000 people disappeared in Argentina in those years. And what you had was protests made by mothers and grandmothers calling for their children to be returned to them. And what these mothers did in this time is they posted the words of the Magnificat around the capital square in Argentina. These words from the Bible that, I'll read it again. The proud will be scattered, and the mighty ones will be brought down from their thrones. And that was a threat. The hungry will be filled with good things, and the rich will be sent away empty. And so the words of the Bible were used as a protest against this military dictatorship in Argentina. And so those words were banned as well. And And so from this view that I had of Mary being this good girl who was just accepting what she was told and was obedient, there's this feistiness to her. There is this strength to her, this strength to understand and endure the difficulties that she faces personally, but also a protest and a resistance to the powers, like I said, particularly the Roman powers, but the powers that would oppress her nation, her as an individual. And I also found it interesting to read. This is the longest set of words of a woman in the New Testament. Okay, and it was the first Christmas carol ever composed. So there's real power to this text that I feel quite excited by, that we don't have this passive girl, but that we have a woman who's willing to embrace revolution and embrace change and take on what comes to her. And she travelled 70 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem. We picture her on a donkey. She may have been on a donkey, she might have walked, but she had that journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem because the Romans enforced this law that people had to go and take part in the census. People had to, in a sense, reveal who they were, reveal their identity, and basically be counted there. And so this is a young woman who went through a great deal, and Christians would believe, you know, she was chosen. She was chosen for who she was, for what she was capable of, and how she would serve the work of God.